Alright, I am going to attempt to do a video today about changing scales on a Benchmade 940. I actually already did this video when I put these Rockscale Design Titanium scales on a few weeks ago, but for whatever reason the audio in the video got corrupted. You can't hear me hardly at all, so I'm going to attempt this again. And the reason that I'm doing this one is that I got another set of Rockscale Design scales, and we'll just take a quick look at those before we get started. So this is the mollusk pattern, the new ones, which is what I really wanted, but all he had in stock at the time was the hatch pattern, and there's nothing wrong with those. I liked the design of the mollusk, this one a little bit better. It's just a little more unique, I think. So I'm going to install these on the knife and remove these Rockscale Design scales. These I will be putting up for sale. And just a quick note about this. You can see that there's a difference in the blue anodizing. They're both the same blue anodized color, but these, and I'm going to flip this one over real quick, and you can kind of see where you don't touch underneath the clip that it looks like this. That blue anodizing, where you touch it, kind of fades pretty quickly into a much more subdued blue. So just a quick note on that. So before we get actually started taking apart the knife, I'll also do what I did in the other video and kind of take a look at what I had done to a couple of this 940 and this one before. So this one started out as a Benchmade 940 Tac 2. I know that's upside down. The Tac 2 has G10 scales, and here are the original scales for it, and it had green standoffs with the original knife. What I had initially done is Flytanium offered scales. They just released these, I don't know, maybe a month ago, maybe a little bit more, I can't remember. They released them in carbon fiber, titanium, brass, and copper. I bought sets in copper and titanium, and on my 940, my just standard 940 BK that originally had the green anodized aluminum handles, I installed the copper, and I love this knife. I carry it all the time. In fact, it's become my EDC knife. It replaced the small Chris Reeve Sebenza that I had, which is also an awesome knife. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I started carrying this one for a while, and I'll probably switch back to the Sebenza eventually, but for now, this is the guy that rides in my pocket in civilian clothes when I'm not in uniform, and I really enjoy it. It is heavy. The copper makes it very heavy, but I still enjoy it a lot. And then on the Tac 2, I had installed the Flytanium titanium scales. I wasn't hugely fond of these. There's just something about the texture or the finish on them. I wasn't real nuts about them. So when I finally got an email saying that Rockscale Design had a set available, I grabbed them real quickly in the hatch pattern, and then I don't know, maybe 2 weeks later, a mollusk became available, so I bought them. And let's go ahead and just real quickly, before we disassemble the knife, take a look at the scales themselves. Oh, look at that. There is, I was missing that screw. Yeah, forget about that. That actually I went over in the other video, but it doesn't matter. So this is the original 940 scale from Benchmade, G10, 940 Tac 2. This is the Flytanium titanium scale, and then this is a Rockscale Design scale. And I'll probably look a little bit after I get the scales changed out at the difference between them on the knife, these two. These scales, though, both the titanium and the factory ones are pretty thin, and they are not milled out anywhere on the underside. The Rockscale Design scales actually flare a little bit more and fill your hand a little bit better. They kind of flare outwards and are more curved or rounded, where these are just kind of flat. And you can see also that the Rockscale Design has this large milled out area to save weight. Also smaller milled out areas here. Now you're going to have a milled out area on all three. That's for the nested liner. And then this is for your Axis Omega spring, and then milled here. That's all for the liner. But these pockets right here are simply for weight reduction, and you don't see those on the Flytanium or the factory scales from Benchmade. And a note about Flytanium. So the Flytanium scales for titanium material will run, I think they're $90, but for that $90 you get the scales and you get standoffs and all the screws that you need for your clip, the liners, and the standoffs. So it's a full kit, and the Flytanium will work with any Benchmade 940 out there, including the one with the aluminum anodized scales. Okay, even though it doesn't have standoffs, the Flytanium offers all the parts that you need. And that's for about $90. $80 is the price for copper and brass, and I think $90 is for titanium and carbon fiber. Now on the flip side, those are made in China. Just to quickly note that, everything from Flytanium for the 940 is made in China. If you want to get the Rockscale Design scales, they are produced in California, the United States, but all they come with is the scales. That's it. So unless you source aftermarket standoffs, you can only use them with Benchmade 940s that come with standoffs from the factory, which is basically everything except for the standard 940 that comes with these scales. So the 940 TAC 1 with carbon fiber, TAC 2 with G10, and then all the special releases from like Going Gear and Knifeworks, I think, has one. Cabela's also has one. The TAC 1601, I think, is theirs. But I think all those have standoffs, so you should be able to put these on any of those 940s. So basically anything that isn't this. And I will also show you, I'm going to go ahead and pull one of these Flytanium standoffs out. And I will show you why, when I get it disassembled, if you do go with the Flytanium scales, you must use their standoffs. You cannot use the Benchmade factory standoffs, and I will go over that when I get into disassembly. So let's go ahead and get into the meat of the video, and that will be disassembling the 940 so that we can install these other scales. I have my little German WIA set of tools here. This is what I use to maintain my knives. They're very high quality. I know this says made in China, that's for the case itself, but all these bits are hardened steel, very precision made. If you've got expensive knives, you want to get some kind of a nice toolkit. I went with these. I actually have a couple of these WIA kits. One I can keep at home, one I can use on the road or whatever. But what we're going to need to do the 940, I have my little driver here, and we need 2 Torx bit sizes, a T6. We'll do all of these screws, including the clip screws. And then we need a T10 for the pivot screw. So that will get us everything that we need, those 2 drivers. So I've already done several of these. I've swapped the scales on this. On this knife, I swapped onto these scales, then to these scales, and I'm going to do these. So I've done this quite a few times. So I'm hoping that maybe this video, if you're a little nervous about taking apart the axis lock, will kind of give you some tips or tricks or whatnot. I actually am going to pull another bit out of here for something a little bit later. But the first thing that I like to do when I go to take these apart is get the blade and the washers out of here, the phosphor bronze washers. So that's what we're going to do first. I'm going to take pressure off of the blade. I'm going to pull the axis lock back so the blade is free swinging and just hold it so that gravity keeps it down. And then I'm going to remove the male pivot screw here. Set him over here. And that's what I got this other guy out for. I think this one should work. I want to get that female pivot screw out. Oops. Keep pressure off the blade. So I'm going to try to push on it. There it came out. So you just don't want to get anything inside of the female threads there and damage them. So you can see I pushed that out, and I should be able to go ahead and pull it out the rest of the way. I'm going to try and keep the knife kind of flat so that the blade doesn't come falling out, potentially cut me. This blade is very sharp. The grind on it's not very good looking from the factory, but it's very sharp. Having a little bit of trouble pulling that out. Let me see if I can push it any more there. It's kind of there. All right, so there's our female pivot screw. And so now the blade and the 2 phosphor bronze washers should be able to wiggle out of there. Okay, there we go. So there's our blade. And here are our 2 phosphor bronze washers. So these go in between the steel liners and the blade. The blade kind of pivots around those. So now we've got, this is just a complete unit here. It's still all intact. And if I wanted to make that blade a little bit easier to get out, I could have loosened some of these screws, which we'll get into a little bit later too on reassembly. So now I'm going to swap out for my T6 bit, and I'm just going to disassemble this guy the rest of the way, which should be pretty easy. And I'm just going to start with the pivots, or the standoff screws. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and take the clip off because I have to get that thing off there in order to access that screw for the nested liner, and I'm going to want this clip on my new scales anyway, so. Okay, so their clip came off. Try and keep parts segregated just a little bit. Come here. Pivot stuff. So here, let's take a quick look while I've got that off. So you can really see, so that's where the clip was, where my hand is not touching when I hold the knife. And you can see it looks much closer to the factory brand new finish from the Rockscale Design scales. And you can see the clip was right in there just a little bit, maybe a couple of places. There you go, you can really see it there. But yeah, you can see that anodizing stays intact under there. But it does kind of rub down a little bit as you use this knife. So let's go ahead and continue with disassembly. I'm going to go to the standoff screws here, loosen those. And what I have done with both of these knives, just a quick side note here, there's going to be a lot of quick side notes here, I guess. You'll notice that I have silver screws and then black screws. And what I did with this, I have these black screws are the factory screws. And then the ones on the standoffs are ones from Flytanium. These are titanium fasteners that came with my scales here. I kind of liked the way that the line of 3 black and line of 3 silver looked on both knives, so that's why I did that. And also, when I put these scales on, I could not find this screw, which is apparently stuck in here in one of those scales. So I'm glad I found that. But anyway, let's continue on or disassembly. You'll have to excuse me if stuff gets out of frame every once in a while, because I'm not actually looking through the phone when I do this. I'm looking down below it to do all this stuff. I'm not looking through the screen on my iPhone. Okay, so there are our standoffs. Standoff screws removed. We can see our green. This is a factory green standoff off the Benchmade 940 Tac 2. So I'm going to go ahead and, before I try and get that other one out, I'm just going to go ahead and take out the screws for the nested liners. There she came. Alright, so there's our second standoff. And you can really see the inside of these still has that nice rich blue anodizing, and then it's faded on the outside because nothing's touching the inside of the scales. So there, a quick look on the inside here. There's one of the steel nested liners, our Omega spring for the axis lock, and that's it looks the same on the other side. See our logo for Rockscale Design here. And you'll have to excuse my fingers are all messed up. I actually just completed my first backpacking hike last week. I did an overnight hike, 30 miles. It was about 15 miles over 2 days, and I camped in between. It's the first time I've done anything like that. It was a lot of fun. But there was a lot of rock scrambling and stuff. And I was carrying, like, I don't know how heavy my pack was. I bet it was almost 50 pounds. I carried way too much stuff. But anyway, just side note, my hands got all messed up on that. So there we've got our scales removed. Here is the assembly of the nested liners. You can see our Omega springs on either side, our axis bar. our stop pin. So we've got it disassembled into all of our parts. So I'm going to take these scales and set them off to the side. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to put these up for sale. So I'm just going to real quick, so I can just do a video. I'll just post a link to this portion of the video later on. So you can see, like I had shown, these are a little worn from the blue anodizing that's new. That happens pretty quickly. Within just a few days, you'll start to see that. You can see some wears where the fasteners were touching there. And on the inside, I mean, there's really, I mean, you can see where the omega, that's where the omega springs rubbing back and forth as you manipulate the axis lock. But I'll put these scales up for sale, and I'll probably put these titanium ones up for sale too. But yeah, there's not really much to point out on these. Most of the wear is going to be not visible. It's going to be underneath the screw heads, and there's a little bit where the clip touched there. But anyway, so there's those. All right, I had made a little mistake there a minute ago, so I had to re-disassemble there real quick. But while I have done that, I'm going to go ahead and talk about these standoffs for just a minute, and the difference between the Flytanium and the factory scales and the Rockscale Design scales when it comes to the standoffs. So when I first bought my my Flytanium scales, I really wanted to use the green standoffs on this one. The green factory standoffs. I thought it would look neat to have that with the copper. Well, what I learned is you can't do that, and here's why. First, let's take a look at the factory standoffs and factory scale. So you'll notice with the factory standoffs, there are two levels there, or two. I don't. The words are escaping me right now, but you'll notice that it's tiered in two places there, and one of them has flat spots. It's not perfectly round. And so that engages right here. You'll notice that slot is not perfectly round and has flat spots. So it actually engages that, and the standoffs cannot fully rotate. They're locked in place with those like that. The Flytanium standoff is this guy, and you'll notice that he does not have that. It's only got one tier where the factory has two tiers above this initial big flat spot. Okay? So the Flytanium scales just have a round hole there. They don't have that oblong hole. And what that means is you cannot put this factory standoff in this hole. The first tier will slip right in there, but that oblong hole has nowhere to go. So you'll see then it's not sitting flush. This part should be sitting flush against the scale, as we see here. Okay, so you cannot use factory 940 standoffs with Flytanium scales. However, you can and have to use them with the Rockscale Design scales. You'll notice, see, it has, now it looks a little bit different. This hole is more oblong, but this one has the flat spots that are used to engage the factory Benchmade standoffs. And here we'll rotate it, and there you see it falls into place on the Rockscale Design scale. So long story short, oh my God, you cannot use Benchmade factory standoffs with Flytanium, but you must use them with the Rockscale Design titanium scales. And I'm going to get a quick drink here because I'm starting to get a little bit parched and slur my words. I got a little cup of hot tea here. If you like hot tea, I really like hot tea and whiskey, so I tend to mix them. This one has Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey in it, which is really good. I also like Jack Daniel's Rye in it, also very good, or just Jack Daniel's No. 7 or Maker's Mark. If it's whiskey, I'll put it in the tea. Let's just put it that way. Okay, so let's get back on task here. Let's reassemble our 940. So the mistake I made just a few minutes ago where I just stopped the video, disassemble, and I'm not going to put all that in there, but I had screwed down the liners, but I did not put the standoffs in. And you can probably get this rear standoff in with the liners fixed to the scales, but this guy would be very difficult to do. So now I've got him in there. Whoops, come here. Get him seated in there properly. I'll tell you what, before I do that, let's be smart here and at least get one of the liners screwed down. So I got my T6 here. Okay. And I'm not going I'm not making these tight. I just want to get them until they get just barely snug, and we'll go over that further on down the line in the reassembly process. Okay, so I got both of those snug. So now my liners are at least held onto the one scale. So now I'm going to take one of my standoffs, put him in place. And you couldn't really tell, but I was putting pressure on the liner to keep it flush, engaged with the scale, so that the threads properly mated and didn't get cross-threaded or something. When I go to do that on this side, I can't really do that because my finger's not thin enough to fit in between the nested liners and everything. So I'll show you what we'll do there. So first, let's make sure that our standoff properly engages our scales. There we go. All right, so we can see that the standoff is sitting flush. The oblong holes have engaged properly. Okay, got my axis bar in there. Now what I'll do is, and that's why I pulled out this bit earlier, this extra bit, I'll take the big end of that, and I'll just slide it in here, because you could see how that, you can maybe see how that's popping up above the scale. So what I'll do, this fits really nicely, almost perfectly in here, and I'll just take that and slide it down right about there, and then just put a little bit of pressure on it, and that should keep, see, now everything's flush in there. And you can see the threads from the factory screws come through. They actually do that on the factory knife too, which is a little bit annoying. But you know what? While I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and get that, I think I'll try and get that rear standoff in there too, see if we can just get the whole thing. There we go, so it's seated in that one. Like I said, you can get that rear one in there, but we'll just try and do it all at once. Okay, so now you can see what's going on. Both standoffs are flush, but my liner there, you can see it doesn't want to rest. So what I'll do, I'm going to put pressure right here for right now, and then I'm going to do what I did just a second ago. I'm going to slide this guy back in there. Get you on the camera there. Slide it down to right about where my fingers are, and it's still loose, but it's taking up that space, so it's holding the liner in place there. So let's go ahead and get it screwed in. Get my T6 here. Just light tightness, just enough to get the threads engaged where the stuff's going to stay together. All right, so whoops, well, that was pretty slick. I forgot that I hadn't done the standoff screws yet, so they spread apart. See, that guy's probably not going to come out of there. This guy fell right out though, and now this is why I wanted to go ahead and do that while I had them all apart, because it's a lot easier. And this is a stupid screw up. I'm probably just going to leave in the video if it doesn't take up too much time. See, I'm trying to rotate it to get those flat spots in line with their appropriate points in the scales. Before I started spinning the scales around and showing you everything, I should have screwed them down. So there we go, got it back in place. So as you can see, even with the liners screwed in, you can get this back one in, but this one's probably going to stay in place. So before that happens again, let's go ahead and get our standoff screws in place to keep this whole unit together. And as I said before, these silver screws are from my Flytanium titanium scale kit. Black screws are from the factory knife. And remember, I'm not going crazy tight here. Oh, come here, you. Just enough to engage. There we go. Keep everything from being too wobbly, but we actually might want a little bit of movement between the parts as we go to install our blade and pivot screw, and we'll get to that. So I'm actually going to back these off just a little bit, all of them, so that it allows a little bit of fluidity between the parts, or among the parts. Okay. So we've got our scales assembled back together. I'm just going to wait. I'll probably do the clip at the very end. But now we want to get our blade and phosphor bronze washers installed back on the knife. And if you look at these things, you can typically tell which side was toward the blade because they'll be shinier. See how that one's a little more dull because the blade's been rubbing against those. And it doesn't really matter which side they go on, but I try and keep, like which side of the blade, but I do try and keep the shinier side towards the blade since it's already kind of worn in. I am going to take just a little paper towel here and just wipe that off just a little bit and get some of the gunk off of it. And you may want to add some lubrication to this at this point. I haven't found that these Benchmades really need much lube. I might put a little bit on there, but right now I'm not even going to mess with it. So now this part can be a little bit tricky. Let's just look. Yeah, our axis bars functioning properly. So what we need to do, and this is a process that I'd recommend. So what we need to do, we need to get both of these washers in there, the blade, and then get the pivot screw, the female pivot screw, to go all the way up through them. So what I'll do typically is I'll take my first washer and I'll set it on there and kind of push it into place. Okay. Just use one of your bits or something until the hole gets pretty well lined up there. Actually, I'm going to slide that back out there so I can show you something here real quick. So, just like our standoffs had a flat spot and we're not perfectly round on one tier, your female pivot screw is the same way. Maybe a little bit difficult to see, but there at the top, notice that's a flat spot. That engages with flat spots in liners. See how you can see that lip right there? It's not perfectly round. So you got to make sure that you're getting the flat spot oriented properly. And on here, and there you can kind of see them maybe a little bit better. Those flat spots are down at the bottom there. So we want to take the pivot screw. We got to make sure that it's aligned properly. And that's what I'm going to do right here. And that's why I introduced a little bit of slop into this, so these parts can kind of move. So here I'm going to try and get these. I'm spinning it, trying to, oh, there it went. Okay. So it's through that first liner, and you'll see you cannot spin it all the way. And I think this is nice because I think it kind of helps keep the pivot from coming loose a lot, since this thing can't actually turn all the way. So anyway, I really just want that to be flush for right now with the liner. And then what I'll do, I'll take one of my washers, the shinier side up, so it'll be up against the blade. And I'm just going to take that and slide it. And I'm trying to do this while looking through the camera, so this may be a little bit. All right, so I'm just going to take my bit here and kind of slide it into place. And then I'm going to try to wiggle. I think I got it. Let's turn it a little bit here. Yep. Okay, so my female pivot screw is now through both the scale, the liner, and through that first phosphor bronze washer. And I need that to be just enough to hold the washer in place. Okay? It can't be up too far because the blade's still got to slip in there. So, what I'll do next is I'm going to take my blade and try and slide it on top of the washer. All right? Now, I've got that in there. The female pivot screw is still holding the washer in place. Now I need to get the female pivot screw up through the pivot hole in the blade. So watch my thumb here. I'm going to pull the axis lock back so it's not putting forward pressure on the blade. Lets everything move freely, and you probably heard it maybe just click into place. There you go. Now I'm just putting upward pressure on my female pivot screw, and it slid right up through the first phosphor bronze washer and right up through the pivot hole in the blade. So there you go. We are well on our way to getting this done. Now, actually, I pushed it up a little bit too far, though, because we still need to get this last washer in there. So I'm going to push this guy back down just a little bit, take pressure off the axis lock, let everything move freely, push it down just a bit so that it's through the first washer and the blade, but there's a gap in there, and right now you can still see it, so I need to push it down a little bit more. We need that gap in there to slide our phosphor bronze washer into place. use this bit. There we go. So now there we've got a gap there. So now I'm going to take my other phosphor bronze washer, and this is the shinier side. Maybe difficult to see on the video, but it is. And then I'm going to slide him into place. Now what may be helpful here is I'm going to go to my little kit. I'm going to get a very small, thin, flat blade screw bit and use that to push in my washer. And then so I'm using it to push in between the scale and the blade, and then once I see the hole for the washer, I can come in from the top, engage that hole, and move it over. I think you can kind of see a little bit of edge of the washer there, so I'm just going to kind of move it a little bit. And now I'm going to start putting up, I'm going to pull back on the axis lock with my thumb and middle finger, and I'm going to put upward pressure on the female pivot screw, and I could feel it when it started hitting the phosphor bronze washer, so I need to move it out of the way just a little bit. So this is a little bit of a dance, pulling back the axis lock bar, putting upward pressure on the female pivot screw, and then I'm just going to kind of push that, and maybe you can wiggle this whole thing, and it might get it to a point where that can get through there. Like I said, it is a little bit of a dance that you got to do here at the very end when you're getting that last. Getting the first washer and the blade in isn't too bad. And remember also, we have a flat spot on the liner up here, and that has to engage. Now it should be, the flat spot on the female pivot screw should be in place because both those flat spots on the liners are aligned. But that's why you want a little bit of slop in all these parts, just so they can kind of slide in there easily. And you can see up here at the front, my phosphor bronze washers slid back too far, so I'm going to try and get it. This will take a minute, so just bear with me. There we go, I think. Well, no, it's still. I'm having more trouble with this one than I normally do. I'm going to get this hex bit here. That might be a little bit better for moving that around right now. Moving that phosphor bronze washer a little bit. Not quite sure what's keeping us. Let's try going in from here with this thin guy a little bit. Sorry, this is taking a little, oh, there it went. All right, so it's just a little bit of a dance, and you'll feel it when it clicks up into place. So now you can see there that my female pivot screws come all the way up through both phosphor bronze washers and my pivot hole in the blade. Okay, so now I'm going to get my male pivot screw in there, and that's my T10 right here. And once again, I'm not going crazy tight here. I just want to get it engaged. So now, got the knife together, all except the pocket clip. Okay, it's loose. So let's go ahead and start tightening stuff down. Now, on some knives, like a frame lock, you may want to tighten screws in a specific order to get like some blade centering or something. Sometimes that can make a difference. On these axis locks, I haven't really found anything like that to be the case. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to do the standoffs first. And first, I'm just going to go finger tight with the bit itself on all the screws. And then I'll do the nested liner screws here. Okay, so we're finger tight on all 4 of our small screws there. And I think the pivot was already, yeah, we'll mess with the pivot in a minute, just enough to get it snug. Okay, and then I'm going to take my T6 and get it in the handle, and I'm going to go through the same process. Now when I tighten these, I'm pinching this with 2 fingers, maybe 3 here, and I'm tightening. Okay, that's it. Don't grip it like a motorcycle throttle and twist it. That's not necessary. So just take a few fingers and just get them finger tight. And when I'm doing this, I typically like to go opposite sides. Really hope the audio turns out on this video, because these videos are long, which means people probably aren't even watching them, but whatever. But that one, I was pretty disappointed, because I'd actually done that, and I'd done a Flytanium copper scales on a Spyderco Manix 2, which was a bitch. That thing was a bear to put together, way harder than this. And the video is no good, because the audio, you can hear me, but it's like super, super faint. So anyway, so we've got all 4 of our screws tightened with the driver here. So, I mean, that's pretty much good. So let's just look at centering and stuff here. This knife was pretty well centered before, and it looks pretty good. Now, you will notice, look at this wedge grind here. I'm not going to lie. I love Benchmades. I have a lot of Benchmades, but man, some of the knives they put out, I mean, they're like, this is, look how slanted that wedge grind is there. It's at an angle like this. It's not good. Their blade grinds are always funky as hell. One side of the grind will be really wide and the other side will be more narrow. This knife overall isn't too bad, and like I said, it's super sharp. But the grinds and stuff, they're a little bit ugly, which sucks because you can see that when it's closed. It doesn't look good. See how askew that is? And of course our centering will be affected as we tighten the pivot down. You may want to use some blue Loctite. I don't really think it's necessary on these screws. Maybe on your pivot you'll want some blue or purple Loctite, or maybe I use some plumbing thread tape sometimes. Will give enough friction where stuff doesn't loosen up. But the action on this tack 2 has always been pretty good. The balance between centering and blade play and good action has always been pretty good on this tack 2. This guy is all right, but the centering's way off on it. Almost rubbing, but not quite. But I don't care. I love that knife. So there we go. And I may mess with the tension on the pivot screw a little bit to get the action where I want it, but that's, of course, personal preference. So that's actually pretty good there. Even without the thumb clip giving me a little support when I flip, it's pretty easily coming open. And no lateral blade play, no side to side there. So beautiful knife, really a good looking knife. These Rockscale Design scales are they're really, really well made. I don't think I went over the price. Duh. I did with the Flytanium, so $90 for copper or carbon fiber, $90 for titanium or carbon fiber, $80 for copper and brass. And that may have changed, I don't know, but I think when I bought them, that's how much they were. And like I said, they come with the full kit. They come with standoffs or pillars, whatever you call them, all the screws you need. Rockscale, and that's what it comes with for that price. Rockscale Design scales come with only the scales. That's it. No screws, no standoff pillars, anything like that. And they start at $154 for no anodizing. And if you want anodizing after shipping, they'll end up being about $175. So you are paying significantly more for just scales with Rockscale, but they are made in the USA, and there is much more machining on them. As we already looked at, you get all these pockets. So this big pocket here, and then these 2 small ones. And then there's also a pocket underneath where the liner would go. So there's actually 4 big pockets that are milled out on these that are not on the Flytanium and the factory scales. And then you do have the intricate, here we can see side by side, the hatch pattern is basically just slanted lines that come down, where this is the mollusk pattern, and it kind of has the lines going kind of different directions and stuff. And it's a little prettier is all it is why I wanted it. I mean, if you're going to spend that much, get what you want, right? I grabbed these because they're very hard to find. Like if you're on an email notification list for Rockscale Design scales, like you better grab them when you get that email notification or they'll be gone. And that's what I did with both of these. So, all right, so we got the knife back together. We'll go ahead and put the clip back on, or not back on. This has never been on this one. And once again, these are the Flytanium silver screws that I'm putting on here. And I'm just going to get my bit out at first. And what I do with these 3-hole clips, I'll kind of show you. The first thing I do is put the middle screw in. And then I'll go in and put the 2 side ones. And there's a little bit of a process to this, and I'll kind of explain it. I kind of touched on it just a second ago when I was playing with the action on the knife, and I had mentioned there's no pocket clip in place there. And I'll get to that in just a second here. Let me get these screws engaged. So I want this to be pretty loose, but what I'll do is I'll come down and I'll just barely snug the middle screw, okay, so that the blade can still move, or I'm sorry, the clip. So I'll snug that down, and then what I'll do is I take the clip and I push it upwards towards the spine of the scales. I don't crank on it or anything. I just move it to where it doesn't move anymore with all 3 of these screws in place, and the middle one a little bit snug. And then I'll come in and I'll go ahead and snug the screws down. And I'll tell you the reason for that in just a second. So now I'm going to remember I'm just doing like a finger tightness here, do the middle, and then the 2 sides in whatever order. And then I'll typically go around a couple of times on these just to make sure that they're all snug. Because as you tighten down, it may take up some slack and allow you to tighten the other one a little bit more. So now this thing is tightened down, and it's in an upward position. Because even with these tightened down, they can move a little bit. So that way it's all the way up. And the reason that I do that is when I open knives, I'm typically grabbing these fingers on the pocket clip and I'm putting upward pressure on it. Well, that way, if I've already moved it as far as it's gonna move, I don't have to worry about it scooting across the scales and messing stuff up. It's a really nitpicky thing, but it's just something that I do. And I do that on all my knives, my hinderers. Chris Reeves, typically, theirs is a different design. They should fit pretty tightly in there, so you might not need to do that. But my hinderer knives I do, Spyderco's, all of them really. That's a little process that I go through. And you may notice too, the factory clip on the Benchmade 940 is this big, like, I think they kind of refer to it as a butter knife clip. I much prefer the split arrow factory clip. And I made sure to get like the black oxide, not the glossy. I hate the glossy ones. These black oxides, they come from the factory looking a little beat up, but they hide wear really well, and I just like the way they look. I think the split arrow goes much better with the 940 than this big clip. And you used to be able to call Benchmade and say, hey, can I get a clip for XYZ models? And they'd send you all the clips you wanted for free. They did recently change that to where they charge $5 for them now. But $5 for a pocket clip really is not bad at all. So yeah, just keep that in mind too. And you'll see this guy, now this clip does sit, typically I bend these, I get tension to where they're just barely touching there. With this particular one, I'm not going to do that quite yet because this is kind of a rough texture. So I don't want too much pressure. I don't want this pinching on fabric as it comes in and out. And when I withdraw my knives from my pocket, I typically lift up on the clip anyway to reduce pocket wear so that the fabric's not being pinched. I'll lift up, and that way there's just less abrasion on the fabric of your pants. But I'm going to leave this one up just a little bit for now as I start to carry it. So I think I've got the pivot right now set pretty well where I want, and we can see the centering's pretty good. It's not perfect. It may be coming over the clip just a little bit, but it's certainly better than the copper one with Flytanium. Look how far over that is towards the non-clip side. I've never had a problem with this loosening or touching, and I've carried this for weeks and I've used it a lot. But you can see the centering is off pretty good on that. This is an older 940. You can see the Wedge Grind on there is not nearly as jacked up as the one on this newer 940 Tac 2 right there. But anyway, so there you go. These are the Benchmade 940. I think I covered everything I wanted to with the standoffs. We got the knife disassembled, reassembled, went over some differences in pricing and stuff among the blades, or among the scales, I'm sorry. And let's just real quickly, now that we've got these things assembled, and I also have the split arrow clip on that guy, let's just look at them side by side and kind of see what I was talking about with the contour of the scales. See how these are really thin here? And these are a little more rounded. They bow outwards towards the center. It fills your hand a little bit better. It does feel good, but this feels fine too. But you can tell the difference. This is flatter, and this is kind of curved outwards. And another place where you can really see it, and where I had first noticed it, if you take a look at the axis bar, Notice how much of the axis bar is sticking out on this one, and it's much less on here. Because when I went to disengage the axis bar on this, I'm like, oh wow, I can't feel it quite as well. And that's not a good or a bad thing. It's just different. It's perfectly easy to disengage the axis bar on here. It's noticeable though. See if I can get a different angle there. See how much more it sticks up above the scales on the Flytanium. And that's how it is on the factory scales too. And on here it kind of has a curved, just barely curved upwards there. But yeah, there you go. And another difference between the Rockscale and the Flytanium is the Rockscale will come in this, it's pretty nice packaging, little clamshell thing, and then the two scales will be separated by this little like microfiber cloth, which is nice. Make sure that they're not bumping up against each other in transit. But when you get your Rockscale Design scales, they'll come like that with one on either side of the microfiber cloth in this decent little, I mean, this is not a Pelican case or anything by any means, but it's a nice case. Where the Flytanium just comes in these plastic bags, the scales will be down here, and then your screws will be in this separated bag up here. The Benchmade 940, I did a video on this talking about what a great knife it is for EDC and stuff, and now there are several options out there for customizing. So, you know, it's really neat. This is a great knife. A lot of people swear by it. Some people hate it and hate Benchmade in general, but I like the 940, and I especially like them customized like this. So I hope you found this video somewhat informative, maybe helped you if you're doing an axis lock or a 940 in particular. Thanks for watching.